Hey guys, tonight we begin with the quiet genius hidden in medieval castle design, the kind that slips past you until you accidentally stand in the perfect spot and feel the whole building rearrange itself around you. What looks like simple stone becomes a blend of psychology, geometry, and just a little mischief from architects who really wanted invaders to regret their life choices. So, before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You step through the outer gate and pause, because the castle does not greet you the way you expect a fortress to greet anyone. There is no grand, straight path pulling your eyes forward, no triumphant avenue leading toward a dramatic entrance. Instead, the ground seems to wander beneath you in a slow curve that convinces your feet to drift left, even though your mind remembers wanting to go right. The layout feels like someone tried to design a natural landscape inside a wall and then decided to make it slightly confusing on purpose. You take a few more steps, feeling the subtle shift in the earth, and realize the path is pushing you toward a cluster of buildings you had not meant to notice yet. It is as if the castle is gently guiding you, the way an experienced gardener nudges a vine toward a trellis. You keep walking, narrowing your eyes at the odd angles that make no immediate sense. The walls do not stand in a polite square. They twist just enough to make you wonder if the builders lost their measuring tools halfway through construction. Then you catch the way sunlight lands on the stone, the way shadows fall exactly where they block your view of potential hiding spots. You start to sense that the unevenness is intentional, an architectural side-eye reminding you that medieval people were many things, but careless was not one of them. The air carries the faint scent of moss and damp stone, a reminder that these walls have been here far longer than most countries have been organized. You hear a flutter of wings overhead as pigeons circle the highest tower, choosing landing spots with the casual confidence of creatures that do not worry about structural engineering. You, however, feel increasingly aware that every corner is built to influence your perception. You follow the curve of the path and notice how it repeatedly narrows and widens in small, quiet pulses. It feels like walking through a conversation the castle is having with itself. A patch of grass rises slightly on your right, forming a small ridge that blocks part of your view. It is not dramatic enough to be a hill, but it is tall enough to force you to turn your head. The moment you do, you spot a second gate tucked into the stone like a secret. You almost laugh, because this feels less like a fortress and more like a medieval version of a prank show, complete with unexpected entrances and architectural misdirection. You step closer, and the angle of the walls shifts again, revealing more than you thought was there, then less, then more. The castle is playing a game with you, and it is winning. The deeper you walk, the more you feel the subtle choreography beneath your feet. The ground tilts in a way that convinces you to slow down without quite knowing why. The walls bend, so your eyes follow their lines to specific places, like an unspoken tour guide who refuses to use words. You realize that anyone entering this space would wander just as you are wandering, pulled by instincts shaped not by desire, but by design. You begin to piece together the strategy behind the strangeness. Invaders rushing forward would lose their sense of direction, turning themselves into confused targets before reaching anything valuable. You, moving at a calm pace, feel the effect in gentler ways, like being escorted by invisible hands that make sure you do not miss the details. When you finally stop in the center of the grounds, you look back at the path behind you. It stretches in a curve that feels nothing like the path you thought you walked. The castle seems to hum quietly around you, proud of the trick it has just played. You stand there for a moment, letting the realization settle. The place is not simply built to protect, it is built to think. And now that you have stepped inside its mind, you start to understand just how clever these stones truly are. You step closer to the outer walls, expecting the usual straight lines you see in illustrations, the kind that make a fortress look like an angry stone rectangle. Instead, the walls curve gently, almost shyly, as if trying not to draw too much attention. At first, you chalk it up to uneven terrain or the whims of medieval masons who had been paid in bread and enthusiasm. But as you move along the base, you notice how your eyes keep sliding in the direction the wall wants them to go, the way a river follows a bank without needing instructions. The curves are soft enough that you do not think about them immediately, yet strong enough to drag your attention in slow arcs around the castle. You tilt your head and realize the wind is doing the same thing. The breeze that had been brushing against your face a moment earlier is now skimming the wall, pulled along by the stone like a loyal pet that refuses to wander too far. The air moves in a smooth ribbon, guided almost effortlessly by the wall's bend. You place your hand against the limestone and feel a faint change in pressure as the wind splits around you. It is not dramatic, but it is unmistakable, and it makes you understand that the people who built this place were far more patient with geometry than you will ever be. As you walk, you begin to see how the curves work like gentle funnels. Your gaze sweeps from one tower to the next without you having to turn your head sharply. The wall nudges you toward vantage points you did not know you were seeking. Even the shadows cooperate, stretching along the stone in long strokes that draw your attention forward. You start to think the wall is behaving less like a barrier and more like a quiet mentor that insists on teaching you something, whether you asked for a lesson or not. You take a few more steps and try to imagine how this would look to someone uninvited. If you were approaching from the outside with less than friendly intentions, the curves would pull your attention away from crucial spots, hiding archers and openings until it was too late. The castle would choreograph your line of sight without ever letting you realize you were being guided. It is a kind of medieval hospitality, although admittedly the sort meant for guests you do not plan to let inside. A gust of wind sweeps down from a higher tower and glides smoothly along the stone, circling you before drifting off toward the far end of the wall. The curve softens the gust, turning what should have been a sharp blast into something closer to a polite nudge. You look upward, squinting at the height, and imagine the builders shaping these bends generation by generation, adjusting angles until the wind behaved exactly the way they wanted. Somewhere in history, a small group of architects probably stood exactly where you stand now, arguing passionately about airflow patterns while everyone else just wished dinner would hurry up. You continue tracing the wall, feeling the subtle pull of its design. The curve guides your steps again, leading you toward a tower you had not intended to approach. You almost smile because you realize you are no longer walking by your own instincts. The wall is choosing your path, and you are letting it. You finally pause and look back at the long arc of stone behind you. The curve feels alive in a quiet way, shaping both wind and vision with the patience of something that has had centuries to practice. And as you stand there, you begin to understand that this fortress never relied on brute strength alone. It relied on shaping the world around it, one gentle curve at a time. You follow the outer path until the ground dips slightly, and that is when you see it, the moat stretching around the walls like a wide, muddy necklace. The castle refuses to take off. From a distance, it looked decorative, the sort of feature added by storytellers who enjoyed exaggerating. But standing here at the edge, you realize there is nothing decorative about it. The water is still, heavy, and darker than it has any right to be, as if holding on to secrets it has collected over centuries. You lean forward a little, trying to see the bottom, but the surface only reflects the sky back at you with the expression of someone pretending to pay attention. You walk along the bank, noticing how the moat feels too wide for comfort, even though you are not the one trying to cross it. There is something unsettling about the distance, something that stretches your awareness thin. It does not matter that you are safe and dry on this side. Your brain insists on imagining what it would feel like to stand trapped on the opposite bank, staring at the water and wondering if it is shallow enough to wade across or deep enough to suddenly teach you to swim against your will. The castle builders understood that uncertainty is its own kind of weapon. You crouch down, picking up a small stone and tossing it lightly. The splash ripples outward in slow circles, and each circle seems to fade before it reaches the far edge. The moat absorbs sound in a way that makes your shoulders tense, without meaning to. You imagine someone approaching centuries ago, weapon raised, courage high, only to stand here and feel their confidence dissolve into that same heavy silence. The water does not move unless it chooses to, and that stillness presses on your chest more than any wall does. As you continue walking, the moat curves with the castle, and you start to understand how it shapes perception as much as it shapes movement. Every time the path bends, the water seems to expand and shrink in unpredictable ways. At one angle, it feels easy to cross, almost laughably so. A few steps later, it stretches wider, and the air around you seems to grow colder. The designers knew how to play with distance, turning a simple trench into something that feels alive, shifting with every glance. You imagine someone approaching with a siege plan neatly organized, only to find their brain quietly unraveling as the moat presents a new challenge every few paces. The wind lifts slightly, sending a faint wave across the surface, and for the first time you see a hint of movement below. Perhaps it is just weeds swaying, or perhaps it is something far less poetic. You step back without thinking, and the reaction makes you laugh under your breath. The water has no interest in you, but it still manages to command respect. You picture medieval guards watching from above, amused at how easily the moat could unsettle someone who was not even an enemy. It is a slow, quiet reminder that danger does not always announce itself loudly. You reach a point where the moat narrows just enough to tempt you, and you understand immediately why this spot exists. It lures the eye into imagining a crossing, then lets the slope beneath the water reveal itself only at the last possible moment. The ground drops steeply, disappearing into murk before you can guess where it ends. You feel a chill run down your spine, not from fear, but from recognizing the cleverness in it. The castle is not simply preventing entry. It is teaching hesitation, one careful illusion at a time. When you finally step away from the edge, you take a last look at the winding waterway circling the stone walls. The moat feels less like a structure now, and more like a quiet mind game wrapped in mud and reflection. As you walk on, you realize the builders understood something that still works centuries later. You do not need roaring defenses when you can plant doubt with nothing more than still water and the unknown waiting beneath it. You approach the gatehouse expecting something ceremonial, maybe even welcoming in a stern, medieval way. But the structure looming ahead feels more like a stone throat, narrowing with each step you take. The path you followed outside widens and bends, but here everything tightens. The walls inch closer. The ceiling seems lower than it should be, and suddenly you are standing in a space that insists you slow down whether you want to or not. Your body reacts before your mind can catch up, your shoulders drawing in as if you hope to avoid brushing against the cold stone. You take another step and notice how the air changes. It grows still inside the passage, trapping every sound you make and handing it right back to you. Each footfall echoes in a way that feels just a little too loud, as if the castle is taking notes on your presence. Your fingers brush the wall, and you realize how smooth the stone is here, worn by centuries of feet passing through the same narrow space. You do not feel enclosed so much as monitored, nudged into caution by design rather than instinct. The further you walk, the more you sense the purpose behind this tight corridor. The floor rises subtly, tilting upward just enough to make you lean forward without noticing. You cannot move quickly here. The space refuses it. You picture someone trying to charge through in the heat of battle, only to find themselves forced into an awkward shuffle that looks far less heroic than intended. It is almost comforting to know that even in medieval times, architecture was perfectly capable of humbling anyone trying to show off. You glance upward and catch sight of the murder holes above, small, dark openings that stare down like indifferent eyes. You know nothing is going to rain through them today, but the knowledge that something once could makes your skin prickle. It is not fear so much as a quiet awareness, that strange feeling you get when stepping into an old elevator and suddenly remembering gravity is a thing. The castle does not need to threaten you to make its point. It just needs to let you imagine. As you continue forward, the corridor turns slightly, bending in a way that forces your gaze to the floor before it lifts again toward the exit. The bend is small, subtle enough that you could ignore it, if not for the way your balance shifts. You realize this curve exists to break momentum, to stop anyone from seeing too far ahead, to make every person entering this space slow down and reevaluate their next step. It is a controlled pause built out of mortar and centuries of strategic patience. You place your hand on the wooden inner doors, noticing how thick and heavy they are, the kind of doors that seem like they were designed by someone who did not trust hinges. You imagine them slamming shut during an attack, the sound echoing in the narrow tunnel and convincing anyone caught inside that their day has taken a very unfortunate turn. Even now, with the doors standing harmlessly open, you can feel their weight in the air. When you finally emerge from the gatehouse, the light feels brighter than it should, as if the world opened up again without warning. You step onto the inner grounds and glance back at the narrow passage you just traveled. From this angle, it seems even tighter, a stone funnel crafted to transform confidence into caution. You understand now that the gatehouse is not just an entry point. It is a filter, a test, a gentle reminder that you are stepping into a place where every feature, even the narrowness of a hallway, was designed with purpose. And as you stand in the open once more, you feel the echo of that deliberate caution lingering inside you. You step toward the drawbridge, expecting it to be the castle's one moment of theatrical flair, the kind of grand entrance that announces itself with the confidence of a royal procession. And in some ways, it is exactly that. The wooden planks stretch across the moat like an invitation, a single bold line connecting the outside world to the promise of safety inside. You can almost imagine trumpets, banners, and someone very proud of their brand new chainmail striding across it with the enthusiasm of a person who has never tested how sturdy medieval carpentry truly is. Yet the closer you get, the more you notice the subtler purpose stitched beneath the drama. The drawbridge is not simply a walkway. It is a lever, a choice, a hinge that decides who belongs and who does not. You listen to the creak of the wood beneath your feet, the faint whisper of old fibers settling under your weight, and you realize this structure was never meant to feel entirely trustworthy. That slight give underfoot encourages caution, not confidence, and you feel yourself stepping more carefully than you expected. The wooden boards are worn smooth from centuries of feet, passing both in hope and in haste. You look down, imagining the hands that crafted each plank, the iron nails hammered in with the kind of determination that only comes from building something people might depend on during the worst day of their lives. You run your fingers over the grain, feeling the faint grooves left by time, and suddenly you understand why the bridge feels both welcoming and wary. It has carried too many stories to belong entirely to either emotion. As you walk farther, you notice how the bridge subtly narrows. It is not enough to be obvious, but just enough that your steps draw inward toward the center. The edges feel slightly exposed, a reminder that falling off would be a very undignified way to experience medieval history. The narrowing focuses your path, funnels you toward the gatehouse, and you can almost sense the architects grinning quietly in satisfaction. Anyone approaching in a rush would find themselves squeezed into a manageable stream. It is a polite method of crowd control. If your definition of polite includes the possibility of being dropped into a moat at a moment's notice, you pause in the middle and look up at the chains stretching toward the sky. They hang with a heavy certainty, thick links shaped to survive centuries of storms, sieges, and questionable maintenance schedules. When the drawbridge rises, you imagine the sound reverberates through the valley, a deep groan that announces boundaries shifting. It is a sound you do not need to hear to understand. The mechanism is a reminder that this giant wooden platform is never quite as grounded as it seems. With one pull, it becomes a shield instead of a path. You picture the scene in the past, armed riders charging forward, only to watch the bridge lift away from them like a curtain closing on the final act. The moat yawns open beneath them, wide and dark, and the castle suddenly feels very far away. You sense the psychological weight of that moment, how the drawbridge controls access not through brute force, but through timing, height, and the quiet threat of separation. The bridge is both invitation and refusal, depending entirely on the angle at which it meets the air. As you reach the far end, stepping onto solid stone once again, you glance back at the wooden span resting so casually across the water. From here it looks almost gentle, but you have felt its intentions under your feet, the dual nature woven into each board and chain. The drawbridge is dramatic when it wants to be, but beneath that flourish lies a mind trained in strategy. It knows how to welcome and how to deny, shifting between the two with nothing more than a rise, a tilt, and the power to make the world on either side feel impossibly distant. You begin climbing the spiral steps of the first tower, expecting a simple rise above the courtyard, but the staircase has other plans. The steps are uneven enough to make your ankles question your life choices, and the stone walls crowd close on either side, curving like they are trying to herd you upward. Each footfall thuds softly, swallowed by the tight space, and you feel the air grow cooler as you ascend. The climb is steady, but there is something about the narrowing spiral that makes you feel both protected and exposed at the same time, as if the tower is giving you shelter while reminding you it has no intention of slowing down gravity should you stumble. When you reach the first landing, you pause to let the world catch up. A small slit window lets in a thin ribbon of daylight, bright enough to illuminate dust drifting lazily through the air. You press closer and glance outside. The ground is already farther away than you expected, the courtyard shrinking into neat shapes, the moat becoming a dark ring instead of a looming presence. From this height, everything looks organized, quiet, almost harmless. You can see the logic of the castle's layout now, how every curve and corner spirals outward from this vantage point. It is strange how height can make danger look decorative. You continue climbing, the steps tightening again, forcing your body to angle slightly inward to keep your balance. Your hand traces the stone wall, cool and textured, marked by the subtle grooves left by centuries of palms that did the same. It grounds you as the spiral pulls you higher, giving you something solid to hold while the world below becomes abstract. You notice your breath change. It is steady, but deeper now, as if your lungs are trying to make sense of the altitude. You would not call it fear, exactly, but there is a quiet awareness creeping into your muscles. The tower wants you alert. By the time you reach the top, the air feels different, thinner but sharper, carrying the scent of open wind rather than enclosed stone. You step through the last arch and emerge onto the narrow walkway that circles the tower's crown. The sky opens around you in every direction, stretching wider than seems reasonable. You grip the low parapet, feeling the rough stone beneath your fingers, and you look out at a view that feels both exhilarating and unsettling. The landscape beyond the castle spreads out in a roll of green fields and distant forests, each one suddenly small beneath your feet. And then the sensation shifts. The longer you stand there, the more you understand how this height changes the definition of safety. The tower protects you by giving you a vantage point that no one on the ground could challenge, yet it leaves you exposed in other ways. A strong wind brushes your sleeve, just enough to remind you how far the drop is on the other side of the parapet. Your heart gives a quiet lurch, not in panic, but in recognition of the thin line between power and vulnerability. From here, You could spot threats long before they reached the walls. Yet if anything reached you up here, there would be nowhere to go but down. You turn slowly, taking in the rhythm of the battlements, the way the stone teeth create alternating slices of shelter and exposure. This upper ring was built for defenders who needed to feel bold enough to act, yet cautious enough to survive. You can almost picture them, boots planted, eyes narrowed, balancing the same mix of confidence and unease that settles in your chest now. When you finally begin the descent, the first step downward feels heavier than the last step up. The height has changed you slightly, stretched your senses thin, sharpened your awareness. The tower has shown you how safety can expand and contract depending on where you stand. And as you spiral down into the stone once more, you carry that quiet duality with you. You approach the arrow slit expecting it to be little more than a medieval peephole, something narrow and practical without much personality. But when you lean closer, the stone frame draws your attention like a quiet invitation. From the outside, these openings look impossibly thin, barely wide enough for a determined squirrel to slip through. Yet standing here, you see how the interior flares outward in a smooth, deliberate funnel. It is a space carved with patience, shaped not just for defense, but for control, the kind that lets you decide exactly what the world outside is allowed to see. You place your fingers along the stone and feel how the edges soften as they widen. The slit is a narrow promise to the outside world, while the interior gives you room to shift, aim, and breathe. You imagine the archer who once stood where you stand now, boots planted, bowstring drawn, using this carefully angled chamber to steady their nerves. The opening creates a sense of safety, yet the view it offers is so precise that you understand why it was built this way. You can see plenty, but the outside sees almost nothing of you. You lean forward slightly, letting your vision stretch through the narrow gap. The landscape outside compresses into a slender slice, turning fields, trees, and distant hills into a single vertical thread. It feels strangely intimate, as if the world has been reduced to a manageable piece you can observe without distraction. The slit directs your gaze like a guiding fingertip, deciding where your attention should fall. You realize these openings were crafted not merely to fire arrows, but to shape perception itself. A breeze filters through, cool and faint, brushing your cheek before slipping away. The wind behaves differently here, softened by the stone funnel, losing its bite before it reaches you. It is a small detail, almost easy to miss, but it speaks to the way medieval builders understood comfort and survival were not opposites. You imagine long hours spent standing at this opening, waiting, watching, steadying breath against the curved interior wall. The design supports both vigilance and endurance. As you adjust your stance, you notice how the angles of the opening encourage your body into a stable position. The interior flare gives you enough space to move the bow, but the narrow slit forces you to aim only where the castle wants you to aim. It is a subtle choreography between human motion and architectural intention, a blend of protection and precision that feels almost elegant. You test the angle of vision again and see how the slit allows a wide horizontal range while keeping your silhouette hidden in shadow. It is clever in a quiet way, the kind of cleverness that does not need to boast. You picture yourself on the outside looking in, seeing only a thin, dark line in the stone, not realizing how much space hides behind it. The illusion reminds you of a magician's trick, the kind where the reveal seems obvious only after you already fell for it. The castle does not simply defend itself, it manipulates assumptions, turning this unassuming opening into a tool of misdirection. You step back a little and look at the slit again from inside the room. The balance becomes even clearer. Too narrow, and the archer would feel trapped. Too wide, and the enemy would find an easy target. But here, in this space, shaped with precise restraint, you understand how centuries of trial shaped the perfect compromise. Shelter without suffocation, vision without vulnerability. As you leave the arrow slit behind, you carry that balance with you. The opening is small, but its purpose feels vast, a reminder that the castle's strength lies not only in its walls, but in the careful decisions carved into every stone. You stand at the base of the castle wall and look up, expecting a sheer vertical rise, a straight climb into the sky. Instead, you notice the wall leans ever so slightly inward, as if the stones have decided to stand with better posture the higher they go. It is subtle, the kind of detail your eyes almost slide past, but once you notice it, you cannot unsee it. The tapering gives the whole structure a quiet tension, a sense of readiness, like a person bracing their legs before lifting something heavy. The wall is not just rising, it is anchoring itself. You take a step back to see more clearly, your heels scraping over the gravel as you try to get enough distance. From this angle, the effect becomes unmistakable. The wall is thicker at the base, its foundation spread wide like the trunk of an old tree, and it narrows slightly on the way up. That change shifts the entire feeling of the tower above, making the top seem lighter, more flexible, even though you know it is made of stone that has no interest in flexibility. You get the strange sense that the wall is doing the architectural equivalent of a stage trick, appearing graceful, while hiding an immense amount of strength beneath the performance. You walk along the base, trailing your hand across the stone, feeling the roughness under your palm. The lower stones are huge, carved in heavy blocks that sit with the confidence of creatures that have never once questioned their purpose. As you move higher with your eyes, the stones become slightly smaller, slightly lighter, arranged with a rhythm that feels both deliberate and intuitive. It is a kind of visual gradient, a slow shift that guides your attention upward without you realizing it. And somewhere in that shift, the wall becomes more than a barrier. It becomes a calculation. You imagine the builders arguing over these angles centuries ago, someone insisting that a slight inward lean would resist collapse under pressure, someone else complaining about the extra work, and a third person just wishing everyone would stop talking so they could finish their lunch. Yet here it stands, proof that the first person won the argument. The tapering strengthens the structure by distributing weight downward, channeling force into the widest part of the wall. Even if an enemy struck the upper levels, the blow would transfer into a shape that refuses to buckle. You pause and look up again, squinting at the sunlight hitting the highest stones. The wall seems taller now that you understand it better, as if knowledge has elongated it in your mind. The narrowing effect tricks your brain into perceiving more height than there actually is. It is like standing under a cliff that keeps stretching the longer you stare. The design is doing more than holding the stones in place. It is shaping your perception of the entire fortress. As you continue along the edge, you feel a shift inside yourself, a quiet appreciation for the subtlety of it all. The wall does not flaunt its strength or announce its cleverness. It just stands there, outwardly simple, inwardly intricate. You realize the tapering is a reminder that power does not always need to be loud. Sometimes it hides in small angles, quiet choices, and the patience to build something that will hold its own long after its creators have vanished. You take one last look, letting your gaze follow the narrowing rise from the heavy base to the slender crest against the sky. What seemed like a plain wall earlier now feels alive with intention. It holds the weight of centuries and the quiet conviction of engineering that trusted subtlety far more than force. And as you step away, you carry a sense of that hidden strength with you, tucked into the edges of your awareness like another tapering line rising towards something greater. You step through the inner gate and enter the bailey, expecting a peaceful courtyard where people once strolled, chatted, and pretended not to notice the goats stealing whatever they could reach. And at first glance, it does look calm. Sunlight spreads across the open ground in warm patches, and the buildings around the edges sit quietly, their wooden beams and stone walls carrying the relaxed posture of structures that have survived more drama than they care to discuss. You can almost imagine daily life unfolding here. The clatter of tools, the shuffle of boots, the low murmur of chores that never truly end. But as you walk farther in, you begin to feel the space shift around you. The openness that first seemed peaceful now feels intentional in a way your instincts cannot ignore. The Bailey stretches wide, leaving you exposed beneath the sky, and you realize there are very few places to hide. The walls loom high above, dotted with battlements and windows small enough to watch you without being seen. You turn slowly, understanding that this courtyard was designed not just for living, but for controlling movement. Anyone standing here is visible from almost every angle. You stop near the center, and the illusion becomes even clearer. Daily tasks could take place here, yes, but in the event of an attack, this open ground would flip instantly into something far less comforting. The same space where a blacksmith might once have hammered out horseshoes becomes a stage where defenders can track every step of an intruder. The openness funnels attention the way a magnifying glass gathers light, and even though you know the walls above you are empty now, you still feel the sensation of invisible eyes watching from the parapets. As you walk across the packed earth, you notice the layout of the surrounding buildings. They sit at the edges like quiet spectators, their doors angled in ways that give quick access to the walls. The stables, the workshops, the storerooms, all align with a kind of practical elegance. Every structure blends daily life with defensive strategy. You imagine someone carrying a barrel, a basket, a bundle of firewood, never more than a few steps from a path that leads up to the battlements. The design turns routine movement into readiness, weaving survival into the rhythm of everyday tasks. A gust of wind sweeps through the open space, stirring dust along the ground and reminding you how vulnerable the center feels. You can try to stand tall, but the courtyard has a way of shrinking your sense of control. If you were an attacker who managed to break through the gates, this would be the moment you understand how thoroughly the castle predicted your next mistake. The open ground becomes a funnel, guiding movement but offering no cover, and the defenders would have the advantage of height, patience, and countless vantage points. You move toward one of the corner buildings and look back, taking in the full scope of the Bailey. Now that your eyes have adjusted to its dual purpose, the entire design seems almost theatrical. It is a stage for normal life, complete with noise and chores, and the 1,000 small routines that filled medieval days. But it is also a stage for conflict, engineered to turn chaos into clarity for the people on the walls. The beauty lies in how seamlessly those two roles blend together, without a single sign screaming which function is which. Standing there, you understand the strange balance at the heart of the Bailey. It is open yet controlled, welcoming yet calculated, peaceful yet ready to transform at a moment's notice. The space breathes with a quiet confidence, knowing it holds power even in stillness. And as you leave the courtyard behind, you carry the awareness that the simplest spaces can hide the sharpest strategies, waiting patiently beneath the surface of ordinary life. You step into the shadow of the keep and feel the air shift, as if the entire courtyard exhales around you. The rest of the castle has its own personality, its own strategies and quirks, but the keep is different. It stands at the heart of everything, a massive block of stone that refuses to apologize for its size. You tilt your head back, expecting to take in the whole structure at once, but your eyes reach only part way. Before you have to shift your stance, the building seems to rise farther each time you look at it, like a mountain that insists on being rediscovered from every angle. There is a strange comfort in its bulk. The walls are thick enough to make you feel that nothing outside these grounds could truly shake them. Even the wind changes its behavior here, softening as it moves along the keep's surface, brushing quietly against the stone instead of rushing past in noisy gusts. You place your hand against the wall and feel a faint warmth stored from the day's sun, held deep in the stone as if the keep collects and protects heat the way it collects and protects everything else. You step back to see more, noticing how the edges of the keep are sharper than the outer walls, less decorative, more direct. There is no attempt to charm you. It is not trying to be picturesque or inviting, and yet the longer you stand there, the more grounded you feel, as if you are leaning against something that has already survived centuries of nonsense and fully intends to survive several more. You can imagine people in the past looking to this building during storms, raids, or even everyday stress, drawing strength simply from its existence. But with comfort comes another feeling, one that settles deeper in your chest the longer you stand beneath the looming structure. It is not fear exactly. It is an awareness, a reminder of scale. The keep is designed to make you feel small, not powerless, not unwelcome, just undeniably aware of your place in the world. The builders wanted you to respect it, and you do, even without anyone shouting orders or pointing a spear in your direction. As you walk along the base, you notice how few windows interrupt the surface. The ones that exist are narrow and high, giving nothing away. The keep guards its interior the way a storyteller guards the last line of a good tale. The thick stone muffles sound so effectively that even your own footsteps feel quieter than before, swallowed by the weight of the place. It makes the world seem farther away, like noise and chaos cannot breach the outer skin of this massive structure. You wander to the main entrance, its doorway recessed in a shallow alcove. The arch above you feels heavy, but not menacing. It is a threshold that demands purpose. You cannot stroll in casually. You pause, feeling the cool air drifting out through the gap, carrying the scent of ancient stone and untouched air. The keep is both invitation and challenge, waiting to see what you intend to do. You stand there for a moment longer, letting its presence settle into you. The keep does not rely on tricks or illusions. Its power is obvious, honest, and permanent, and as you take a final look up the towering face of stone, you feel something unexpected, a quiet steadiness, a sense that even though the keep intimidates, it also anchors you, reminding you that strength can be both overwhelming and reassuring at the same time. You step through the entrance of the keep, and the temperature changes so noticeably that you pause for a heartbeat, letting the shift settle across your skin. Outside, the courtyard air carried the faint bite of wind, but in here, the warmth lingers like the memory of a long extinguished fire that still refuses to leave. The stone feels different too, not cold as you expect, but gently tempered, as if the building has learned how to hold heat the same way it holds secrets. You walk forward, allowing your eyes to adjust to the dimmer light. The rooms unfold in a quiet sequence, each one placed with a kind of calm intelligence that makes you wonder if medieval builders had a deeper understanding of comfort than modern people give them credit for. The outer chambers are cooler, wide enough to let drafts slip through without apology. Storerooms, work areas, places where heat is more inconvenience than necessity. You run your hand along the wall and feel the faint current of air moving beside you, guided through narrow gaps and thick stone in a deliberate pattern. As you step into the next space, the temperature rises almost imperceptibly. This room sits slightly deeper in the keep, cushioned by the layers of stone that surround it. The walls here feel thicker, and the ceiling is just low enough to catch warmth before it can drift upward and wander off. You imagine people gathering in this room on cold evenings, trading stories or rubbing their hands together while the heat collected from the day settles comfortably around them. The keep was never meant to be luxurious, but this room gives the impression of a place where practicality and simple comfort meet halfway. Moving farther in, you notice how the layout becomes increasingly focused. The innermost chambers are arranged like a series of warm pockets, each one designed to retain heat with the quiet stubbornness of a winter cloak. You step into one of them and instantly feel the temperature rise again, held by walls so thick they could probably ignore a storm pounding outside. These spaces sit in the center of the keep like a heart surrounded by protective armor. Here, the heat does not escape easily. It gathers, settles, and clings to the stone. You picture the floor below, where fires once burned steadily, feeding warmth through narrow vents and cleverly placed flues. The heat rises naturally, encouraged by the design of the rooms above. The builders seemed to understand that warmth travels with the same instinctive sense of direction as water, and all they needed to do was shape the path that guided it. You stand near a corner and feel a faint upward draft, the ghost of a heating system that once kept whole families alive through harsh seasons. The more you explore, the more the building's logic becomes clear. Bedrooms are placed close to the core, insulated by storage rooms and thick walls. Narrow hallways act like thermal bottlenecks, slowing the escape of warm air. Even the stairwells twist, in ways that help funnel heat where people would gather at night. You cannot help but admire the quiet intelligence in all of it, the way the keep uses its own mass to create comfort without relying on anything more than stone and air. You pause in the final chamber, one of the warmest yet, and listen to the soft stillness. You can almost feel the centuries of evenings spent here, people drawing close to the center of the keep, not just for safety, but for warmth. The building seems to hold the memory of those moments, as if the heat that once lived here continues to echo through the stone. When you finally step back toward the cooler outer rooms, you realize how deliberate every placement has been. The keep is not simply a fortress of stone. It is a machine for survival, designed to carry warmth exactly where it is needed and keep it there with remarkable patience. And as you walk toward the exit, you cannot help feeling a quiet respect for the builders who understood not just how to defend a life, but how to make one livable. You stand at the base of the stairway and immediately sense something different about it. The steps curl upward in a tight spiral, narrowing as they rise, the entire staircase twisting to the right. At first it just feels awkward, the sort of design choice that suggests the builders either disliked symmetry or enjoyed making visitors second-guess their balance. But as you place your foot on the first step, the purpose settles in, quiet and unmistakable. This staircase wants you to climb it as a defender, not an intruder. You start up slowly, running your hand along the inner wall. The stone is cool and slightly rough, steady enough to keep your fingers anchored as the steps pull your body into the curve. The spiral tucks you close to the center, giving your right arm plenty of space to swing if you needed to defend yourself. You picture yourself holding a weapon, your arm unblocked by the tightness of the turn, and the thought fits so naturally that you understand the builders crafted this staircase with that exact motion in mind. Then you imagine someone trying to climb up toward you with their weapon hand forced against the outer curve, restricted by the wall, their movements cramped and slow. The right turn of the spiral gives the advantage to whoever is coming down, not up. It is a small detail, easy to overlook when you are not being chased, but now that you feel the geometry guiding your body, the brilliance becomes impossible to ignore. Halfway up, the steps begin to narrow. The inner edges shrink to slivers that force you outward, though not too far. Your foot placement becomes more deliberate. You learn quickly that rushing would be a terrible idea. You picture soldiers centuries ago doing exactly what you are doing now, climbing with caution, using the shape of the stairwell to control their pace. These steps were not designed for elegance or comfort. They were built to make sure no one moved faster than the architecture allowed. The air grows tighter as the walls curve around you. A single slit window appears, offering a blade of sunlight across the steps and a brief glimpse of the courtyard far below. You pause long enough to breathe in the small draft slipping through the opening. It feels like the stairway is reminding you that the world still exists outside this stone coil, even if the climb makes it easy to forget. As you continue upward, the sounds around you change. Footsteps become softer, nearly swallowed by the spiral. Your breathing echoes differently too, caught and reshaped by the curve. You realize this space would make it nearly impossible for attackers to move silently. Even the shift of cloth or the scuff of a boot would give them away. The staircase listens in every direction. Near the top, the stairs twist one last time, tightening until you feel as though you are climbing through the neck of a stone hourglass. When you reach the final step, you emerge suddenly into a wider landing where light spills in from an open doorway. The transition feels almost theatrical, like stepping out of a secret passage meant for those the castle trusts. You turn back and look at the staircase from above. From this vantage point, the logic of the spiral becomes even clearer. The design funnels movement, shapes behavior, and quietly dictates who holds the advantage in a fight. It is architecture acting as strategy, stone guiding human instinct with a precision sharper than any blade. And as you move away from the opening, you feel the lingering awareness of how every step was chosen for you long before you ever set foot on it. You step into the great hall, and the first thing you feel is space, a wide and deliberate emptiness that stretches above and around you in a way nothing else in the castle has so far. The ceiling rises higher than you expect, supported by beams thick enough to make you wonder how many forests were politely convinced to give up their trees for this single room. The stone walls expand outward, creating a chamber that seems to inhale as you walk in, drawing you into its center without ever touching you. Your footsteps echo as if the hall is examining the sound, deciding whether you belong here or whether you have wandered somewhere meant for people with more titles and better handwriting. It is not an unkind space, just an honest one, crafted to make you aware of your own posture. You find yourself standing a little straighter, lifting your chin a touch, as though the room has opinions about slouching. Light filters in from tall windows set high in the walls, arranged so that the brightest patch falls exactly where a high table once stood. Even without the furniture, you can feel the purpose lingering. This was where decisions were made, where voices rose and quieted, where someone at the far end of the hall only had to stand to gather attention. The architecture amplifies authority with an effortlessness that makes you suspect medieval builders understood human psychology in ways modern architects pretend they invented. You walk along the length of the hall, feeling how the room shapes your movements. The center is wide enough for ceremonies or feasts, or the kind of arguments that need extra room for pacing. The edges narrow just enough that anyone standing there automatically feels like an observer instead of a participant. You imagine how the arrangement once influenced everything from political debates to who got the last piece of bread at dinner. The acoustics are the next thing you notice. Even the smallest sound bounces upward, curving along the roof beams before gliding back toward the floor. You test it with a soft tap of your finger against the wall, and the faint echo lingers longer than it should. You picture someone speaking at the far end of the room, their voice carrying effortlessly across the hall without them needing to raise it. The space does the work for them, granting them presence simply by existing. You take a breath and feel how the air moves differently here. The hall is warmer than the stone corridors, but cooler than the inner chambers, balanced by the sheer volume of the room. Heat gathers at human height, pooling gently before drifting upward and dispersing. The effect is subtle, but it keeps the space comfortable enough for gatherings while allowing the loftier areas above to handle the excess warmth. Even temperature becomes part of the hall's quiet choreography. As you near the center, you notice marks on the floor where long tables once rested, faint grooves carved by centuries of chairs scraping forward and back. These small scars feel like memories etched into the stone, hints of laughter, of arguments, of celebrations and alliances forged under candlelight. The hall may be empty now, but it feels anything but silent. You turn toward the dais at the far end, imagining how it must have felt to stand there facing the length of the hall. From that vantage point, the entire room becomes a frame, focusing every eye, every breath, every shift of attention onto the person in that elevated place. The hall does not merely host authority, it constructs it. You stand there a moment longer, letting the space settle around you. The room speaks without sound, shaping emotion and hierarchy with its lines and height and deliberate openness. And as you leave, you understand why the Great Hall was the beating heart of the castle. It did not need to command. It simply existed, and that was enough. You enter the kitchen expecting chaos, the kind that feels like a permanent cloud of smoke and the faint panic of someone burning something important. Instead, you step into a space that feels surprisingly calm. even though its walls once witnessed heat, noise, and the kind of culinary experiments that probably terrified anyone with a sensitive nose. The first thing you notice is the air. It moves with a strange sense of direction, flowing past you in a gentle current that carries the scent of old stone and long-vanished fires. You step farther in and look up. The ceiling lifts into a quiet arch, and along the upper edges, narrow vents open like discreet mouths that never exhale visibly, but seem to inhale everything. The air rises naturally from the hearths, slipping toward those high exit points the way water seeks the lowest path. You imagine a roaring fire below, sending waves of heat and smoke upward, yet none of it pooling in the space where the cooks once moved. The architecture has been shaped to guide the flow without anyone needing to wave a cloth or shout about smoke getting in their eyes. You pause near the massive fireplace that dominates one wall. The hearth is big enough to roast a whole animal, or possibly two if someone had questionable priorities during feast season. As you crouch down, you see how the stones angle inward above the opening, shaping the draft with a deliberate slope. You feel a faint current brushing across your face as if the room is still testing its own ability to pull air upward. You imagine cooks standing here, sweating over pots and pans, and realize they never needed to fight the smoke because the building did that part for them. As you move along the counters, you notice small gaps in the walls, barely visible unless you look for them. These narrow openings pull fresh air inward, guiding it toward the hearth in a lazy sweep that keeps the smoke drifting exactly where it is supposed to go. The whole room feels like a quiet choreography of heat and airflow, carefully arranged so the fire can breathe without filling the kitchen with haze. You picture people chopping vegetables or kneading dough, benefiting from this hidden system without needing to understand why it worked. You lean closer to one of the vents and feel how the air moves gently toward it. Even now, with no fire burning, the natural pull remains. The castle uses the difference between warm and cool air like a tool, letting the rising heat draw fresh air behind it. It is simple, elegant, and more reliable than any clever gadget you could plug in today. You imagine the builders shaping these features with the confidence of people who understood that smoke has its own personality and can be convinced to behave if given the right path. As you explore farther into the kitchen, you notice the floor dips slightly toward a drainage channel. Water would have flowed out easily, but spilled soup or grease would have stayed far from the hearth where slipping could be dangerous. Everything here feels like a conversation between necessity and intelligence, a negotiation that balances comfort with survival. The airflow design is only one part of that agreement, but it is the part you feel most clearly as the cool draft brushes your ankles. You step back toward the center of the room and look again at the interplay of vents, arches, and stone. The kitchen is not just a place for cooking. It is a quiet machine built to manage fire with efficiency and patience. Even standing in its stillness, you can feel the shape of the air itself, moving to the rhythm the builders intended ages ago. And as you leave the room, you carry the subtle realization that even the simplest medieval spaces hid a kind of genius, living in the air above the hearth, guiding smoke like a well-trained companion. You step into the storerooms expecting dust, maybe a lonely barrel sulking in a corner, but instead you find a space that feels strangely alive despite its silence. The air is cooler here, crisp in a way that tells you these rooms were not designed by accident. The moment you cross the threshold, you sense the temperature drop enough to make you pause. It feels like walking into a stone memory that has decided to preserve everything it touches. You move farther in, and the walls stretch long and low, thick enough to hold back heat, wind, and whatever else the outside world tried to throw to them. You run your fingers along the stone and feel a steadiness, the kind that does not waver, even when seasons turn unpredictable. Someone once understood that food is only useful if it stays edible, and these rooms were carved to make certain it did. grain, salted meat, dried fruit, barrels of ale that probably caused more arguments than they solved. All of it depended on this quiet environment holding its ground. You walk beside a line of old shelving and imagine it once filled with sacks stacked carefully enough to avoid crushing the ones at the bottom. The builders seem to have arranged everything with a certain patience, leaving narrow gaps between the shelves and walls to keep air moving. You notice how the floor slopes ever so slightly, directing any stray moisture toward channels where it could slip away without lingering. Even the smallest detail hints at survival wrapped inside simplicity. As you move deeper into the storerooms, the air grows stiller. Sound feels muted, swallowed by the density of the walls. You picture people long ago coming in from the cold, ducking their heads under the low ceiling, carrying baskets from harvests they hoped would last through winter. These rooms were not glamorous, but they carried more power than any throne or gleaming hall. Without them, the castle would stand mighty and empty, impressive but starving. Survival depended on planning, and planning depended on spaces like this. You pause beside a cluster of old barrels, imagining the weight they once held. The people who managed these stores were likely respected in ways history forgets. They counted, measured, rationed, predicted, and reassured. A miscalculation here could ripple outward and become hunger, unrest, or worse. But when the storerooms were full, the whole kingdom breathed easier, knowing the worst of winter could be endured behind these walls. You take another step and notice how the ceiling rises a little toward the back, creating a pocket where warm air could gather without touching the goods below. It is subtle, a quiet trick of geometry that protects what matters most. You stand beneath it and feel the faint warmth lingering there, held suspended like a promise. The builders shaped even the air itself, coaxing it into doing its part without complaint. As you trace your path back toward the entrance, you look once more at the long rows of space and imagine them fully stocked. Even without the food, you can feel the weight of responsibility echoing through the emptiness. The storerooms are the unsung foundation of everything else you have seen. Towers, walls, gates, all useless without the quiet assurance that people could eat, survive, and plan for tomorrow. When you finally step outside, the warmer air wraps around you and you understand something profound. These unassuming rooms, tucked away beneath stone and shadow, once held an entire kingdom steady. Strength may roar at the battlements, but survival whispers from the storerooms. You step into the servant passage expecting something cramped and gloomy, a leftover piece of the castle that no one bothered to make comfortable. Instead, you find a corridor that feels strangely purposeful, as if the stones themselves have learned to move even when no one is walking through them. The air is still, but there is a quiet sense of motion hiding in the walls, like echoes of footsteps that never fully fade. You start forward and immediately notice how narrow the space is, just wide enough for a person carrying a tray or an armful of linens to slip through without brushing the sides. The walls press close but not uncomfortably. They simply guide you along a single, steady path. The passage bends gently, avoiding sharp corners that might cause collisions on busy days. You imagine servants weaving past each other with baskets, tools, food, and tasks that never stopped accumulating. The design creates a rhythm you can almost hear, a steady heartbeat beneath the castle's grander pulse. As you walk, you see small alcoves cut into the walls, each one just big enough for a person to step aside. You picture someone ducking into one of these spaces as a noble passes by in the adjoining hall, remaining unseen but still working, still moving, still part of the invisible engine that kept the castle alive. Those tiny recesses feel like breath marks in a long piece of music, moments of pause before the next movement begins. Farther along, the corridor dips slightly. The change is subtle, almost playful, but it shifts the way your body moves. Your footfalls quicken without meaning to. You realize the builders created this slope to encourage efficient pace, letting momentum assist tired legs carrying heavy loads. It is a small kindness buried in stone, easy to miss, but you feel it in every step. You reach an intersection of passages, each one equally narrow, each stretching off toward a different part of the castle. The layout seems confusing at first, but the more you examine it, the more it resembles a hidden map of daily life. One passage leads toward the Great Hall, where meals needed to arrive with confidence and no visible chaos. Another splits toward storerooms, where ingredients and supplies rotated with the precision of a well-practiced dance. A third climbs upward, its steps shallow enough to allow someone to ascend quickly without spilling whatever they carried. As you choose a direction and continue, you notice how the sounds of the castle filter through the walls. Voices murmur faintly from a room above. Farther on, the muffled thump of a door closing travels down the passage like a distant drumbeat. The walls transmit just enough sound to keep servants aware of what was happening, but not enough to distract them. The architecture controls information in the same way it controls movement, offering only what is needed. You follow the path to a narrow window tucked high above eye level, a small sliver of daylight that softens the gloom without giving anyone outside a clue about the constant movement within. You stand under the beam of sunlight and feel how the space balances secrecy with function. These passages were built for those who kept the castle alive without ever stepping into the center of attention. They carried food, messages, repairs, and routines, all while remaining nearly invisible. As you move deeper into the network, the rhythm becomes clearer in your mind. The servants would have flowed through here like water through channels, guided effortlessly by the architecture's quiet intelligence. Every turn, slope, and alcove shapes a pattern of movement that feels both practical and strangely graceful. You realize these passages form the castle's circulatory system, moving energy and work through stone arteries that never called attention to themselves. By the time you reach the end of the corridor, you feel as though you have traced the hidden heartbeat of the entire fortress. These passages may be narrow and quiet, but they created the rhythm that allowed everything else in the castle to flourish. You step toward the chapel and immediately sense a shift in the air, as if the space ahead has learned how to quiet footsteps without making a sound. The doorway is modest compared to the Great Hall or the Keep, yet something about its proportions nudges your shoulders to relax and your breathing to slow. It feels less like entering a holy place, and more like stepping into a room that understands the need for gentleness, no matter what form your thoughts take. Inside, the light changes again. It softens as it filters through tall, narrow windows set deep into the stone, turning the dust in the air into tiny drifting sparks. The colors are muted, but they glow just enough to suggest warmth rather than grandeur. You move farther in and notice that the ceiling rises in a slow curve, drawing your gaze upward without force. The vault above does not shout its importance. It simply exists, offering space for whatever contemplative thoughts choose to wander through. The floor beneath your feet feels cooler than the rest of the castle, its smooth stone worn by countless footsteps. You can almost hear the quiet procession of people who once came here, some with heavy hearts, some with simple routines, some probably trying to avoid thinking about how long the service might last. The room accepts every intention without judgment. The architecture guides reverence rather than commanding it, shaping the experience without insisting on a single interpretation. You walk toward the front, where a simple raised platform anchors the room. The space is not ornate, but every line seems purposeful. There is a subtle symmetry at play, a balance that creates stillness without locking everything into rigidity. You stand near the center and feel how the acoustics shift. Even your smallest breath seems wrapped in a soft echo, not magnified but gently carried. You imagine how a single voice might have sounded here, rising with delicate clarity, not overpowering anyone listening but weaving through the air with ease. As you explore the edges of the chapel, you notice small alcoves carved into the walls. Each one holds a faint impression of use, perhaps once holding candles or simple decorations. These recesses feel like quiet invitations for private moments, tucked away from the open floor. The light from the windows touches them softly, creating pockets where someone could pause without feeling observed. The builders understood that reverence can be loud or silent, public or private, and the architecture gives room for all of it. You pause near a window and rest your hand against the stone. The warmth of the sunlight has seeped deep into the wall, creating a gentle contrast against the cooler floor. The narrowness of the window draws the light into a concentrated beam, turning a simple patch of wall into something almost luminous. You feel how the design focuses attention, but without imposing meaning. The light is allowed to be just light, and whatever significance you assign to it belongs entirely to you. Stepping back toward the center, you take in the whole room again. There is no grand ornamentation, no overwhelming display of power. The chapel feels honest, built with an understanding that true reverence comes from within, not from towering decorations or heavy symbolism. The space encourages stillness simply by being still. It invites reflection without demanding silence. It offers calm without insisting on awe. As you leave through the same modest doorway, you feel a lingering sense of balance settle across your thoughts. The chapel has not tried to change you. It has only offered a place where change could happen if you needed it. And in that quiet generosity, the architecture reveals its deepest strength. You step onto the wall, walk, and the wind greets you first, brushing along your face as if checking whether you are prepared for what comes next. The battlements rise in front of you in a simple alternating pattern, solid merlons standing shoulder to shoulder with open crenels. At a glance, the design feels almost decorative, like a row of tidy stone teeth lining the edge of the rampart. But the moment you move closer, you feel the rhythm settle into your body, guiding your steps in a way that feels older than any training manual. You begin walking, and your pace adjusts instinctively. The spacing of the merlons encourages a steady pattern, a subtle pull that nudges you to pause behind each block of stone. You step forward again, and without thinking, you shift slightly so your shoulder is tucked into the protected space, your line of sight framed by the gap just ahead. You test the motion once, then twice, and soon you find yourself falling into a sequence that feels both natural and strangely rehearsed. The battlements are teaching you how to move. You lean out slightly through a crenelle and look down at the world below. The drop is dizzying, but the stone at your sides narrows your focus and keeps your body anchored. The opening is just wide enough to allow a clear view of the ground while still offering shelter. You imagine holding a bow or spear, and the way your arms would fit into the narrow space becomes obvious. You step back behind the merlon and feel the sudden calm that comes from being hidden again. The rhythm continues. Look, move, shelter, repeat. As you walk farther, you notice how the pattern helps you conserve energy. The merlons provide small moments of cover that break the tension of constant exposure. They create a pulse in your movement, a back and forth between readiness and guarded stillness. You picture defenders centuries ago following the same steps, breath syncing with the architecture, minds sharpening as bodies learned the dance the wall demanded. The battlements turn defense from a frantic scramble into a measured sequence. You run your hand along the top of one of the merlons. The stone feels weathered, smoothed by time, and the hands of countless soldiers who once leaned here. The top is just high enough to protect your chest, and just low enough to allow you to peek or strike without overextending. You realize the proportions are not random. They shape your stance, making you slightly crouch when needed, rise when safe, and shift your weight with more intention than you expected. The wall quietly adjusts your posture until every movement feels purposeful. The wind rises again, slipping through the crenelles and brushing against your face in gentle bursts. Even the air seems choreographed, funneled by the curves of stone so it flows predictably. You imagine how smoke, arrows, and shouts would once have traveled through these openings, each carried by the same patterns of wind. The battlements controlled not just bodies, but visibility and sound, turning the rampart into a living corridor of information. You pause at another merlon and look out across the landscape. The alternating pattern stretches ahead of you, each rise and gap creating a steady visual beat. It reminds you of the rhythm in the servant passages, the quiet structure in the storerooms, the subtle angles in the walls. Everything in this castle moves with intention. The battlements simply reveal it more openly. As you continue along the walkway, your body responds more naturally to the pattern. The architecture becomes a partner instead of a backdrop. Every step feels guided by the stones beneath your feet and the openings beside your shoulder. Without speaking a word, the battlements have taught you how to defend the castle in a way that feels instinctive. When you finally reach the end of the wall walk, you glance back at the long line of merlons and crenels. Their rhythm lingers in your muscles, a quiet echo of the movements they shaped. The pattern was never meant to be beautiful, yet in its simplicity, it has crafted a kind of choreography that still guides you long after your footsteps fall silent. You step out onto a quiet ledge near the outer wall and notice a groove running along the stone like a narrow scar. At first it looks ordinary, the kind of weathering you might expect after centuries of wind and rain. But when you crouch down and run your fingers through it, you feel the clean, deliberate shape. The channel is smooth, purposeful, and angled with the kind of precision that does not happen by accident. You straighten slowly and follow its path as it snakes along the wall, leading your eyes upward toward gutters carved into the stone with the same patient intention. A soft breeze brushes across your face, and you imagine rain gathering on the roof above. Instead of spilling wildly over the edge, the water would slip into these channels and run along their curves like horses following a trusted trail. The thought makes you smile. Medieval storms were probably loud, messy, and dramatic, yet here the castle coaxed their energy into tidy lines. You picture rainwater obediently funneling itself into the carved gutters, flowing with a kind of domesticated politeness that storms do not normally offer. You step closer to one of the downspouts, a chute formed from interlocking blocks shaped like a stone throat. You peer inside and see a faint groove running down the center. The channel narrows enough to control the force of the falling water, slowing it to a predictable flow before it exits at the bottom. You imagine the builders testing this design, adjusting angles by small degrees until the storms that once battered these walls became manageable. It is a quiet sort of power, the kind that bends nature with understanding rather than brute force. As you follow the path downward, you notice how the gutters redirect the water away from the foundation. The castle refuses to let storms pool at its feet, guiding every drop toward distant soil where it can sink harmlessly into the earth. The more you look, the more the system appears, less like a collection of channels and more like veins, carrying the pulse of rainfall through a body that knows exactly how to handle it. The stonework turns weather into rhythm, transforming chaos into something almost gentle. You press your hand against a vertical groove and feel a faint chill lingering there, as though the memory of past storms still clings to the stone. Even without rain, the line feels alive. Water once slid here in steady sheets. Guided by architecture that understood storms could be partners rather than threats. You imagine standing here during a downpour, watching the channels come to life as the castle directs every drop with calm authority. You walk along the base of the wall and find a row of small runoff mouths carved just above the ground. They point outward with a slight upward angle, sending water a short distance away from the stone so it would not erode the foundation. The effect would have been satisfying to watch. Little bursts of rainwater shooting out in neat arcs, each one a quiet victory against the storm's attempt to unsettle the fortress. You can almost hear the steady rhythm of it, a kind of low percussion beneath the roar of rain on the rooftops. When you step back to take in the entire system, the design feels almost intimate. The castle did not try to fight storms. It learned their habits and shaped itself around them. Every groove, channel, and spout works together with patient clarity, turning rain from a threatening force into a predictable companion. And as you move away from the wall, you feel a strange sense of peace knowing that even the sky's wildest moods once flowed through this place with quiet cooperation. You walk into a narrow corridor that feels unassuming at first, just another passage carved between heavy walls. But as your eyes adjust, you notice the floor dips in a way that seems too deliberate to be where, and the ceiling rises into an awkward shadow. Above, there is a tension here that does not belong to the calmer parts of the castle. You slow your steps without meaning to, as if some ancient instinct has reached out from the stones and placed a hand on your shoulder. You crouch slightly and examine the uneven floor. The stones are arranged in patterns unlike those elsewhere, subtle but unmistakable. A patchwork of shapes designed to keep you guessing. You imagine trying to cross this space at speed, your feet fumbling for stable ground, while defenders above watched carefully. You realize the builders were not only shaping the castle, but shaping the panic of anyone who tried to force their way through. The architecture becomes a psychological game, one the intruder never volunteers to play. A little farther on, you spot narrow openings in the ceiling. They look almost decorative until you picture what they once held: boiling oil, heavy stones, or perhaps just the unnerving sight of defenders aiming down with absolute clarity. The openings are arranged in a staggered pattern, allowing multiple angles of attack while keeping the attackers below in a state of confusion. You stand under one and feel the faint dizziness that comes from imagining something dangerous poised above you. The fear is gentle now, only a whisper, but it tells you everything you need to know about the past. You move forward, and your hand skims the wall, tracing grooves carved into the stone. These grooves guide water away during storms, but here they also guide your fingertips towards something hidden. You find a recess only large enough for a hand, and when you peer inside, you see a lever-shaped cavity, long since empty. You realize this was once part of a mechanism that controlled a trapdoor or barrier. The thought sends a shiver along your spine. The castle was built to anticipate threat, to respond with precision long before steel met stone. You step into a wider chamber where the air feels heavier. The ground shows faint marks where pivoting beams once rotated. You imagine these beams swinging with brutal force, blocking entry or striking an opponent off balance. The space is arranged so the defender could disappear into alcoves invisible to anyone entering for the first time. The room becomes a stage where fear is choreographed, each movement predicted by the angles of the walls. As you pause, the psychological weight of the space settles over you. This part of the castle was designed not simply to injure, but to unsettle, to make an intruder question every step, every sound, every shift of air. The fortress turns uncertainty into a weapon, shaping hesitation the way a sculptor shapes clay. You feel it even now, though nothing threatens you except the echoes of old intent. You move on, passing through a narrow doorway with a ceiling low enough to force you into a crouch. On the other side, the room widens dramatically, a sudden opening that steals your sense of direction. The contrast is jarring on purpose. Attackers would have spilled into this space, momentarily disoriented, while defenders positioned above could take advantage of that single heartbeat of confusion. The architecture listens to human instinct and exploits it. By the time you step back into the gentler parts of the castle, you feel the difference like stepping out of a storm. The traps do not roar or flash with menace. They simply exist with quiet confidence, patient and precise. You realize a fortress does not rely only on stone and strength. It relies on understanding fear, shaping it the same way it shapes walls, turning uncertainty into a silent guardian long after the defenders have vanished. You stand beneath an archway that feels narrower than it should, the ceiling dipping low in a way that makes you instinctively straighten your back, as if trying to please the architecture. At first, the stone above looks ordinary, just another slab in a corridor full of them. But then your eyes catch the faint outline of a square cut into the ceiling, its edges softened by time but still unmistakable. You step directly under it and tilt your head, feeling the quiet weight of understanding settle in. The opening above you is no accident. It is a murder hole, and it waits with the stillness of a trap that knows it no longer needs to spring. You move slightly to the side and examine it again. From below, the hole seems small, almost polite, the sort of feature someone might miss if they walked with their thoughts drifting elsewhere. But you imagine standing here during an attack, the corridor packed with the noise and desperation of intruders who thought they had finally breached the castle walls. Then you picture defenders above, calm and composed, looking down through this opening with clear sight lines and more control than the people below could ever understand. The psychological effect alone feels sharp enough to cut. You take a step forward and glance along the ceiling. More openings appear in a neat, calculated row. Each one is positioned to overlook the tightest parts of the passage, the choke points where attackers would bunch together. You imagine the defenders dropping stones, pouring hot sand, or simply shouting commands through the holes, turning confusion below into coordinated action above. The design shapes both panic and authority, showing you that these features were not just tools of violence, they were tools of perception. You crouch and rest your fingers against the floor, where shadows pool beneath one of the holes. Even the ground feels slightly angled, as if encouraging intruders to shift their footing at the worst moment. You straighten and suddenly realize the true precision of the design. Anyone below is fully exposed, their focus pulled upward in a moment of helplessness. The opening steals confidence. It forces anyone standing here to feel watched, judged, and entirely within reach of someone they cannot see. You step beneath another opening and look up again, imagining your own face illuminated by flickering torchlight. The sense of vulnerability is immediate. It does not matter that the castle is empty now. The space remembers. Your body reacts the way countless others must have reacted, tensing shoulders, tightening breath, glancing around for escape that does not exist. The architecture manipulates instinct with quiet mastery. The thought makes you pause. The murder hole is not large, but its presence is immense. It represents the moment when control shifts, when the defender reclaims momentum without ever stepping into danger. You can almost hear the echo of footsteps above, the calm movements of someone lifting a bucket or positioning a stone, their confidence sharpened by the knowledge that the opening gives them the final word. As you walk farther, you notice how each hole aligns with hidden rooms above. These chambers are not grand or comfortable. They are practical, narrow spaces where defenders once moved quickly, their actions coordinated by the shape of the corridor below. The murder holes become part of a larger system, an architectural language spoken between floors, each opening a punctuation mark in the rhythm of a fight. You reach the end of the passage and look back one last time. The holes dot the ceiling like dark eyes, unblinking and perfectly placed. They do not shout threats. They only remind you how fear can be shaped with precision, how a single opening can make a corridor feel like a trap disguised as a hallway. And as you step out into open air again, you feel the lingering awareness of those silent squares above, the psychological weight they still carry even after centuries of quiet stone. You enter the guard room and immediately feel how different the air is compared to the rest of the castle. It carries the faint echo of movement, as if the room remembers every shift of weight and every tired sigh that once filled it. The walls are thicker here, holding warmth and muffling sound, creating gulf, a space where vigilance and exhaustion tried to coexist without getting in each other's way. You step farther in, and the room begins to reveal its quiet intelligence. The first thing you notice is the spacing. Benches line the walls at steady intervals, each one placed just far enough apart that a person could sit without feeling crowded, yet close enough to remind them they were part of a team. You picture guards resting here during long night watches, leaning forward with elbows on knees, boots planted in positions that said they were tired but still ready to move. The room's arrangement creates a rhythm you can feel in your own posture. You sit up straighter without thinking, as if matching an unspoken expectation lingering in the air. You walk between the benches and find narrow tables set against the walls, their surfaces bearing faint scratches that hint at cards played to stay awake or quiet meals eaten between patrols. The tables are small enough that no one could comfortably lounge for long. They invite use, not relaxation. You sense how the room balances comfort with discipline, offering just enough ease to keep fatigue manageable without letting anyone slip into true rest. The architecture nudges you toward alertness, but with a kind hand. As you move toward the center of the room, the spacing becomes even more deliberate. The open area is wide enough for quick movement, a sudden meeting, or the rapid scramble that accompanies unexpected alarms. The floor shows soft depressions, where heavy boots pace during slow hours. You imagine guards circling this center space to stay awake, their footsteps tapping out a rhythm in the quiet hours before dawn. The room takes that movement and folds it into its shape, making pacing feel natural rather than aimless. You notice small alcoves built into the corners, their shadows deep and welcoming. At first, they look like places for storage, but standing near one, you feel how its recessed position offers a moment of privacy without allowing someone to disappear completely. A guard could stand here, sip water, stretch, breathe, and still remain within reach of the room's atmosphere. These alcoves are gentle pauses, not escapes. The builders understood how fatigue creeps into the mind long before it shows in the body. Above you, narrow slits in the wall allow thin blades of air to slip into the room. The air moves just enough to carry away the heaviness of stillness, keeping the space from growing stale. You realize how important that must have been during long watches, when time dragged like a stubborn mule. The room keeps the guards connected to the outside world without distracting them. A faint draft against the back of the neck could be enough to wake someone drifting too close to sleep. As you stand near one of the walls, you notice the placement of the torches. Each holder is positioned high enough to cast a wide circle of light, leaving no dark corners where drowsiness might settle. The glow would have discouraged heavy eyelids, but it is not harsh. It is steady and warm, a reminder that vigilance does not need to feel punishing. Guards would have kept their attention sharp with the help of light shaped by the room itself, not by force of will alone. You take one last slow look across the space and begin to understand how carefully everything is arranged. The benches, the alcoves, the circulation of air, the open center, even the small marks on the floor, all contribute to a delicate balance between readiness and weariness. The guard room is not a place of glory or spectacle. It is a place where endurance was shaped by stone and spacing. As you step back through the doorway, you carry with you a clearer sense of the unseen duty these rooms supported. The castle protected itself not only through walls and traps, but through the steady, measured vigilance of those who lived in these quiet spaces, guided gently by the architecture that understood them. You step into the courtyard and feel the space open around you, like a breath held too long finally released. The air is brighter here, carrying the scent of grass and stone warmed by sunlight. As you move toward the center, your eyes land on the well. It stands modestly, with a circular stone lip worn smooth by countless hands, nothing flashy or imposing. At first glance, it seems like a simple feature, just a place to draw water, but the longer you look, the more its presence expands. It is not decorative, it is the heartbeat of the courtyard. You approach and rest your palms on the rim. The stone is cool despite the sun, as if it stores its own quiet memory of the deep earth below. You lean slightly and peer into the darkness that spirals downward, past layers of stone fitted so tightly you cannot imagine a single drop escaping. You feel a faint shiver as you realize how much depended on this shaft disappearing into the ground. Water meant life, and without it, the castle would become an empty shell, no matter how thick the walls or how sharp the arrows. As you study the well, you start noticing how the courtyard wraps itself gently around it. The layout seems harmless, but every path, doorway, and storage alcove is arranged with the well as the center of gravity. Servants would have approached it from one direction, guards from another, and residents from a third, all converging on the same vital point without crowding each other. You imagine the daily interactions that once happened here, each person dipping a bucket or waiting their turn while conversations rose and fell with the rhythm of the rope creaking over the wooden spindle. You run your fingers along the groove where that rope once slid. The groove is deep enough to speak of centuries of repetition. You picture hands guiding the rope, steadying full buckets, wiping away splashes before they trickled onto boots. These marks are the castle's diary, filled with entries about survival, routine, and quiet resilience. You feel a strange intimacy in knowing the stones. Remember every tired morning and hurried evening when someone came here because they had no choice. When you step back, you notice small channels carved into the courtyard floor, guiding spilled water toward garden beds or storage troughs, rather than letting it pool wastefully. Even the drips and accidents were used purposefully. You imagine the sound of water splattering into the garden soil, feeding herbs that flavored meals or plants used in healing. The well becomes not just a source but a network, connecting every necessity of daily life. Your eyes drift to the surrounding buildings. You now understand why the kitchens sit close, why storerooms are placed within easy carrying distance, why the guards' quarters have a direct line to the well. During a siege, every second mattered, and these distances could mean survival. You picture defenders rushing out with buckets during an emergency, the layout allowing them to move smoothly, even under pressure. The courtyard becomes a living machine, built to sustain the people who sustain the castle. As you walk slowly around the well, you notice a second ring of stone encircling it at a distance. It is subtle, barely raised above the ground, but it marks a protective buffer that keeps carts and hurried feet from crashing too close. The boundary shapes movement without shouting instructions, preserving the well's stability even when the castle was overflowing with activity. You admire the quiet authority of that circle, how it manages safety through gentle guidance rather than force. You return to the well one last time and rest your hand on the rim again. This time the stone feels warmer, as though responding to your understanding. The darkness inside is no longer mysterious. It is dependable, steady. A reminder that survival often comes down to simple necessities arranged with clever care. You leave the courtyard with a deeper appreciation for how a fortress thrives not only through defenses and intimidation, but through the quiet, constant presence of water rising from hidden depths. You climb the winding steps of the highest tower, each footfall echoing in a narrow spiral that seems determined to test your lungs and your patience. The air grows thinner as you ascend, carrying the faint smell of old mortar and the stubborn pride of stones that have held their place for centuries. You grip the railing as the stairs turn again and again, the world below falling away until the climb feels less like movement and more like entering a different layer of the castle's mind. When you finally reach the top, the transition is sudden. The tight tunnel of the staircase releases you into open sky, and the wind greets you with a cold rush that wipes away every lingering thought of the climb. You step onto the platform, and the world spreads out in every direction, wide and unhurried, as if it has been waiting for you to notice it properly. The landscape feels so vast that for a moment you forget the castle behind you. You walk to the parapet and rest your hands against the stone, letting your eyes follow the horizon. Rolling fields stretch outward like ripples around a thrown stone. Forests cluster in the distance, their edges forming irregular lines that once revealed movement long before an enemy reached the walls. Rivers snake through the land in shining curves, their surfaces catching light in a way that would betray any crossing army. At this height, the land is not just scenery, it is a quiet observer. You begin to understand why towers like this mattered so much. Every rise of the ground, every patch of trees, every glint on the water told a story to the watchers stationed here. You imagine a guard standing where you stand now, scanning the fields with practiced calm, noticing tiny changes that most people would miss. A column of dust on a dry day, the unnatural shimmer of metal, birds scattering in a sudden burst. From the same patch of woods, the landscape becomes a living map, the kind that updates itself constantly without ink or parchment. As you walk along the edge of the tower, You notice how different parts of the land reveal themselves from different angles. The tower is placed with mathematical precision, not only for height but for the way it aligns with valleys, roads, and pathways that funnel travel, whether friendly or hostile. You see the narrow pass to the north where traders once approached, the bend in the river where boats became visible long before they reached the docks, and the open plain to the east where an approaching force would have no hope of hiding. Each direction offers an early warning, a whisper from the land itself. You pause at a corner where the wind is strongest and close your eyes for a moment. You hear the fields below bending in long waves, the distant rustle of trees responding to a gust miles away, the low hum of the castle walls resonating under your boots. The sounds form their own layered message, subtle but telling. You imagine the watchers who once stood here, listening as much as looking, trained to interpret the world as if it were speaking directly to them. When you open your eyes again, the landscape feels closer, as though it has stepped forward to remind you of its importance. It is not just a backdrop to the castle. It is a partner in defense. A tower this high does not merely oversee, it collaborates, using everything from weather patterns to flocking birds to offer information. You realize that the height changes more than perspective. It changes understanding. As you descend the first few steps back into the tower's interior, you cast one last glance at the horizon. The land stretches outward with quiet patience, offering answers to those who know how to read it. Up here you feel small, but not insignificant. You feel included in a conversation between stone and earth that has been ongoing for centuries, waiting for attentive eyes like yours. You descend the first few steps into the underground passage, and the light thins almost immediately, not fading in a natural way, but collapsing with intention, as if the staircase is swallowing it on purpose. The air cools as you move downward, brushing against your skin in a steady whisper. You pause for a moment, letting your eyes adjust, and realize the darkness here behaves differently. It is not the chaotic, unpredictable kind you find in caves or forests. This darkness is measured. It has structure. You place a hand on the wall, feeling stones smoother than those above. The surface has been worn down by centuries of fingertips and torches, each touch revealing another clue about how these passages once guided people who needed to move unseen. You take another step and the sound of your footfall shifts, no longer echoing sharply, but sinking into the space as if the corridor is swallowing noise along with light. The silence is not accidental. It feels engineered. As you press deeper into the passage, you notice how the ceiling dips just slightly, forcing you to bow your head in the most vulnerable posture imaginable. The adjustment feels instinctive, yet as you continue walking, you begin to understand that this posture was not a flaw. It was part of the design. Anyone moving through these halls would automatically slow down, become more cautious, more aware of every movement. The architecture trains you, guiding your body long before your mind realizes what is happening. The corridor turns sharply, and when you round the corner, the darkness gathers differently. It does not fill the space evenly. Instead, it settles in layered pockets, like curtains someone forgot to draw fully closed. You find yourself scanning the shadows the way a guard or messenger once would, learning to read the depth of each one. Some are shallow, empty by design. Others are recessed just enough that someone could hide there, invisible until you were an arm's length away. You stand at the threshold of one of these deeper pockets and feel a faint, primal chill. This is a place meant for ambush or safety, depending entirely on which side of the castle's loyalties you belong to. You move on, reaching a spot where the floor drops slightly. The lowered section channels moisture toward a deeper drain, keeping the passage dry enough for hurried footsteps. Even the darkness behaves logically here. Your eyes catch faint glints of reflected light along the floor, guiding you without making the space truly visible. You imagine a torchbearer running through these halls, the flame flickering wildly, the reflections turning the ground into a string of shining clues pointing the right way forward. You notice ventilation shafts carved high into the walls, invisible until you are directly beneath them. They let in small threads of air that slip downward in cool ribbons. The movement of the air carries a strange reassurance. It tells you there is still a world above, even if you cannot see it. The shafts also keep the torches from suffocating in their own smoke, allowing light to survive in small doses without breaking the darkness entirely. It is a careful balance, one designed to keep people oriented while keeping enemies disoriented. The passage widens briefly into a chamber where the darkness behaves in yet another deliberate way. It pools in the corners but thins near the center, as though the room is designed to reveal anyone who steps into it. You walk to the middle and feel exposed, illuminated not by light, but by the absence of hiding places. Guards could stand here and read the posture of anyone entering, their eyes adjusting quickly while newcomers blinked against the carefully rationed shadows. As you follow the passage farther, the air grows warmer, and you sense you are nearing an exit. The darkness loosens its grip, stretching into softer shades of gray. You step into the faint light and feel the shift immediately. Up here, darkness retreats naturally. Down below, you realize it was not nature at all. It was craftsmanship, a design woven from shadow. You make your way down a narrow side corridor that seems to have no real purpose, the kind of hallway you would normally ignore if the castle had not already taught you that nothing here is accidental. The air feels slightly cooler, carrying a hush that reminds you of someone holding their breath. You walk slowly, letting your fingers trail against the wall. The stones here feel different, smoother, more deliberate. You pause, frowning, and run your hand back along the same path, this time paying attention not to what you feel, but to what you do not. There is a seam. It is faint, barely more than the width of a nail, but once you notice it, the entire wall changes shape in your mind. You lean in, studying the way the seam curves downward, as if guiding your attention toward a point you were never meant to see. You press gently, and the stone gives beneath your hand with the slightest shift, like an old cat deciding it will allow you to pet it. The wall moves inward a fraction, not opening fully, but acknowledging its hidden purpose. You step back, heart ticking a little faster, as the castle reveals its quiet trick. You press again, and this time the door swings open soundlessly. Inside lies a narrow passage swallowed by shadow. You imagine how many people walked past this section of wall without ever knowing someone might be standing just a few steps away, separated only by a thin layer of stone and a secret someone centuries ago thought worth hiding. The realization sends a small spark through you. Secrets are not accidents here. They are part of the design. You step through the hidden doorway and feel the atmosphere shift. The air grows warmer, as if the passage remembers frequent use from long ago. The walls are close enough that your sleeves brush them when you move, each stone edged with tiny marks from tools that carved this space out of the castle's ribs. This passage feels intentional, not rushed or improvised. You sense a purpose woven into every inch of it. You imagine messengers slipping through this narrow throat of the castle, carrying messages too important to risk on open floors. You imagine servants gliding silently behind walls, appearing suddenly in rooms as if conjured. You imagine lords and ladies using these routes when they needed to disappear long enough to be strategic, or when they wanted to appear somewhere surprising, which in politics was nearly the same thing. The architecture becomes a stage, and these passages the ropes and pulleys behind the curtain. Farther in, you find another door disguised as part of a storage alcove. Its wood matches the surrounding beams perfectly, the grain lined up with such precision that you wonder how many apprentices it took to learn this kind of subtle craftsmanship. You press your palm against the panel and feel the faint pushback of a latch hidden deep within. The mechanism clicks softly, a sound so small you would miss it if you were not listening for it. When it swings open, you find yourself behind a tapestry on an upper landing. The fabric glows faintly with light from the hall beyond, and when you push through it, you emerge into a space that seems almost offended by your sudden appearance. You glance back at the tapestry with a quiet grin. This door was not made for you, yet it welcomed you all the same. As you stand in the hall, you begin noticing more spaces that could hide similar doors. A pillar that sits too far from the wall. A corner that curves gently instead of meeting at a clean angle. A patch of stone too smooth compared to the rest. Each detail hints at more hidden paths, more routes that once carried secrets through the castle like veins beneath skin. You turn once more toward the tapestry, understanding now that architecture is not only about defense or comfort. Sometimes it is about silence, about choosing who knows what and when, about building deception into the very bones of a place so it can protect its people, not just from arrows and fire, but from curiosity and betrayal. You walk on, carrying with you the unsettling thrill of knowing the castle is not as solid or honest as it pretends to be. It has layers, just like the people who built it. And now that you have stepped through one of its hidden doors, you can feel those layers shifting gently around you, as if acknowledging that you finally understand them. You climb the final steps to the battlements, just as the sun begins its slow descent, and the first thing you notice is the light. It stretches long across the stones, pooling in warm streaks that make the walls glow as if they have been storing sunlight all day and are finally exhaling it. You step forward and the light shifts around your feet, curling along the walkway like a companion that knows exactly when to appear and when to slip away. You realize immediately that dusk transforms this place into something sharper, more aware, more alive. As you walk along the wall, the crenellations break the sunlight into neat sections, creating alternating bands of brightness and shadow. You step through them one after another, feeling the temperature change slightly with each shift. The shadows cool your skin, the light warms it again, and the rhythm settles into your body as naturally as a heartbeat. You imagine a guard centuries ago walking this same path, letting the pattern keep him awake during long hours. The architecture shapes not just sight lines, but attention. You pause beside one of the merlons and glance outward. The land stretches in soft colors, blurring at the edges where the evening light begins to fade. But the shadows gathering near the trees and stones tell a different story. From up here you can read their shapes as clearly as words on a page. Anything moving across those shadows would betray itself with a flicker. You would recognize instantly. You begin to understand how dusk was never the enemy for defenders. It was an ally that carved clarity into the landscape with subtle strokes. You move on, and the walkway narrows slightly as the wall curves. The narrowing feels deliberate, forcing you into a pace that encourages quiet focus. You notice how the shadows deepen in the spaces beneath the overhangs. They cling to the stone in a way that would hide a tired guard's eyes from anyone below, while still allowing the guard to observe everything. You test this out, stepping into one of the deeper shadows. The world outside remains clear to you, but if someone tried to look up, your face would dissolve into darkness. The stone becomes armor. Farther along, a torch bracket catches your attention. It sits lower than you expect, placed not to illuminate the path fully, but to reveal only enough to prevent missteps. The light is intentionally stingy, pooling in a small circle instead of flooding the walkway. You realize the real illumination comes from the interplay of dusk and architecture. The torch simply fills the gaps. You picture the flame flickering at night, its movement blending with the shifting shadows in a way that would confuse anyone trying to target the guards. Light becomes a distraction rather than a beacon. As you continue walking, the wind rises, brushing against your neck with a cool insistence. It carries the faint scent of approaching night, a mixture of earth and stone settling into stillness. The battlements respond to the wind with soft whistles that change pitch depending on where you stand, as if the wall is tuning itself to the evening. You imagine those whistles once serving as quiet reminders for guards, letting them know when a gust might extinguish a torch or carry distant sounds toward them. You reach a corner tower just as the last edge of sunlight slips away. The stones turn from gold to gray, the shadows stretching until they merge with the sky. You stand still, letting the dimness settle over everything. The battlements no longer look defensive in the daytime sense. They look serene, confident, familiar with the darkness, rather than threatened by it. Only now do you fully grasp the purpose of dusk on these walls. It turns the castle into a creature of half-light, one that sees more clearly than anyone approaching it. Shadows sharpen movement. Light outlines shapes. Darkness conceals the watchers while revealing the watched. And as you walk back toward the stairway, you feel the battlements themselves adjusting to night, preparing for the hours when silence becomes the strongest shield of all. You step into a long corridor, and the first thing you notice is the way every sound behaves as if it has been trained. Your footsteps do not echo randomly. They bounce forward in a steady rhythm, repeating themselves just far enough ahead that you feel as though someone is walking with you, a few paces in front, murmuring encouragement with each tap of your boots. You pause, and the echo pauses too, folding itself neatly into the stone, as if obeying an unspoken rule. You test it again with a soft tap of your heel, and the corridor answers promptly, the sound rising and falling in a measured arc that feels almost purposeful. You move farther in, and the air grows cooler, carrying small hints of noises from other parts of the castle. A faint clatter travels along the stone, muted but clear enough for you to imagine the direction it came from. The sound does not scatter. It slides like water in a narrow channel, following the corridor's shape with smooth certainty. You begin to understand that acoustics here were never accidental. These halls were tuned, whether consciously or through instinctive craftsmanship, to carry sound where it needed to go and to hide it where it did not. You walk slowly, letting each breath drift ahead. The castle feels like it is listening with you. You hear a whisper of wind, squeezing through a slit window somewhere out of sight, and the sound bends around the corner in a delicate curve. It arrives softened, the sharpness removed, as if the walls are filtering it to keep you calm. You imagine guards once relying on this strange clarity, hearing approaching footsteps long before anyone appeared. The corridor becomes an early warning system, alerting its defenders without raising alarms. Near a junction, you notice how the acoustics change again. Here your footsteps grow louder, sharper, the echoes striking the walls with quick certainty. You stop and tilt your head, and the silence that follows reveals even more. In this spot, the walls gather and reflect sound in a tight pattern. Anyone approaching from any direction would announce themselves whether they wanted to or not. Even the quietest movement would create a whispering blur that swirls through the space like a signal flare. You feel a flutter of awe at how a simple curve of stone can dictate the honesty of a footstep. You continue down another stretch, this one narrower and lined with tall archways. The arches shape the air differently, catching faint noises in their hollows and releasing them with a gentle echo. As you pass under the first arch, you hear the soft echo of your breath, not frightening but strangely grounding. You can sense your position in the corridor by the rhythm of the reverberation. The castle gives you orientation through sound, the way a blindfolded singer might find her place in a cathedral by listening to her own voice. You try whispering a single word, and the sound travels forward in a thin ribbon, barely returning to you. This section absorbs sound instead of reflecting it. You feel the difference immediately. This was a place for hushed conversations, for planning, for quiet movement that needed to remain unseen and unheard. The walls here act like confidants, swallowing secrets the moment they are spoken. Farther along, you arrive at a wide doorway leading into a broader hall. Before you enter, you listen. The hallway beyond carries sound differently, letting it spread wide like ripples instead of bouncing it directly back. From here, even a small disturbance inside the hall would drift into the corridor in softened form. You would know something was happening inside, but not precisely what. It is a subtle kind of protection, giving defenders the advantage of awareness without revealing their own position. As you step back toward the heart of the castle, you feel the acoustics shifting around you once more. Each corridor becomes a different voice in a larger conversation, some clear, some quiet, all intentional. The castle speaks through echo and silence, guiding you gently with the sounds it chooses to share and the ones it chooses to hide. You enter a quiet gallery that opens unexpectedly between two heavier corridors, and the first thing that catches your attention is not the stone itself, but the color threaded through it. You did not expect this. Castles, in your mind, belong to a world of gray walls and dim hallways. All function and no flourish, but here the stone carries a faint tint, subtle enough that you almost miss it, yet strong enough that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. A soft red warms one section of wall, while a gentle ochre glows in the next, as if the castle has decided to speak in a palette rather than in words. You step closer and realize the color is not painted on. It is part of the stone, chosen deliberately, placed with care. You run your fingertips across the surface and feel the minerals beneath your skin, the tiny flecks of iron or clay that give the stone its quiet hue. The warmth of the red makes the space feel strangely alive, as though the castle is trying to keep your attention steady, guiding your mind as much as your footsteps. You imagine guards stepping through this same stretch of hallway, instincts settling each time the color changed, as if their bodies understood the message without needing to put it into thoughts. As you move deeper, the colors shift again. A cooler stone appears near the entryway to a storage wing, a muted greenish tint that seems to dampen the energy of the space. You feel your breath slow without meaning to. Even the sound of your footsteps softens. The stone encourages a quieter pace, one suited to the work and orderliness that once defined this area. You picture servants carrying supplies, their minds focused by the naturally calming tone surrounding them. The architecture shapes behavior not by command, but by atmosphere. Farther along, you find patches of brighter stone near a stair that leads upward. These blocks almost glow in the fading light, encouraging motion rather than stillness. They act like gentle arrows, pointing the way forward. You climb a few steps and glance back, noticing how the colors create a gradient that subtly directs you upward, each section ushering you into the next without the need for signs or shouted orders. The castle communicates through its own silent language. When you reach the landing, the color deepens again, gathering into a richer brown that feels grounding, almost weighted. This space once connected living quarters, and the warm earth tone gives it the feel of a threshold, a transition from public duty to private thought. You imagine residents stepping through this place at the end of long days, the color easing them away from the rigid tone of the outer halls. The stone becomes a mediator, softening the shift between worlds. You follow a branching corridor and notice a section where the color fades almost completely, returning to the cold gray you originally expected. At first, it feels like a disappointment until you realize what the gray accomplishes. It strips away distraction. This part of the castle leads to utilitarian rooms, perhaps workshops or armories, and the colorless stone removes any temptation to linger. It is a corridor meant for purpose, and the absence of warmth reinforces that simplicity. Even lack of color becomes a tool. As you walk onward, you find yourself paying attention to every shade, every shift, every subtle variation in the stone. Colors guide you through mood and meaning. They mark boundaries, gently assign levels of importance, and create unwritten rules about how people should move and feel within these walls. You begin to see how carefully this palette must have been chosen. It is not loud, not decorative for its own sake. It is a quiet system of emotional navigation. By the time you reach a window where sunlight spills across the floor, the colors around you come alive in a way you did not expect. The warm stones glow, the cooler ones deepen, and the neutral ones sharpen into clarity. You stand there for a moment, understanding the intention that runs through the castle like a hidden heartbeat. In a place built for survival, color becomes its own kind of order, its own kind of comfort, its own kind of strength. You step beyond the castle walls expecting the world outside to feel like a separate place entirely, but it does not. The village spreads out in a pattern that feels almost like an echo of the fortress behind you. The cottages, paths, and market stalls seem arranged with a quiet intelligence, as if the castle has extended its influence outward and shaped the land with a gentle but unmistakable hand. You walk down the first lane and realize the village is not simply near the castle. It is part of it. You notice how the houses cluster in loose rings, the closest ones huddled near the base of the outer walls. Their placement creates a natural buffer, a soft shield of human life that both supports and protects the fortress. Paths between them curve rather than run straight, forming subtle channels that slow movement. You picture a stranger navigating these bends, hesitating, recalculating, their pace steadily dropping without them ever realizing the village is shaping their steps. Even the angles of the doors and windows seem to guide attention toward the castle, reminding everyone who truly anchors this landscape. As you wander deeper into the village, you see how certain buildings form small pockets of activity. The blacksmith sits near the main path leading to the gatehouse, close enough for repairs to be made quickly, but far enough that sparks and noise do not disrupt the tranquility near the homes. You imagine the rhythmic clang of hammer on metal signaling readiness long before trouble reached the walls. The marketplace sits slightly lower in the terrain, a bowl-shaped space that once collected both people and information. News would have drifted here faster than anywhere else, whispered between merchants whose goods and gossip shape the castle's understanding of the world beyond. You pause near a well that seems almost like a sibling to the one you discovered in the castle courtyard. Its placement is not random. It sits at a crossroads of footpaths, ensuring that no matter where you lived in the village, water remained a short walk away. You picture villagers gathering here, their conversations weaving through the same essential patterns as the stone walls inside the castle. The well becomes a center of gravity, and you realize the village has its own rhythms of survival, ones the castle depends on as much as it protects. You continue along a narrow lane and notice how certain houses align themselves to catch the morning sun, while others face the road leading to distant farms and forests. The placement feels intentional, as if the village was designed to balance comfort, productivity, and watchfulness. Even the open fields beyond form part of this pattern. Their visibility allows early detection of travelers, traders, or threats. You imagine watchers posted at the edges, reading the movement of crops in the wind or the behavior of startled animals, the same way guards atop the tower read the horizon. As you walk farther, you recognize the subtle truth the village carries. A fortress is powerful, but isolation weakens it. Here, survival flows from cooperation. The villagers supply food, labor, knowledge of the terrain, and the constant hum of life that keeps a castle from becoming nothing more than cold stone. In return, the castle offers protection, authority, and the promise that someone is always watching the horizon. The two rely on each other in a partnership so old and seamless you can almost feel it breathing beneath your feet. You turn back toward the towering walls and notice how their presence changes now that you have seen the village. They seem less like barriers and more like guardians. The village completes the castle's design, extending its influence through fields and streets, turning the landscape into a living part of its defense. You understand now that the fortress is not only built from stone, it is built from people, habits, patterns, and the quiet choreography of daily life. As you walk back toward the gate, you feel the connection as clearly as the stones under your hands. The castle and the village are not separate worlds. Together they form a single organism, each shaping the other with steady patience, each protecting the other with a loyalty carved into the land itself. You stand in the shadow of the gatehouse when the first sign of tension ripples through the castle, subtle enough that you almost dismiss it. A murmur travels along the walls, not from voices but from movement. You feel it through the stones beneath your feet. A soft vibration, like the shift of a creature waking from deep rest. The castle is reacting to something, and suddenly you see it not as a collection of parts but as a single, breathing whole. You move toward the courtyard and notice how people instinctively fall into patterns that seem rehearsed yet require no spoken command. A messenger darts along a familiar route, passing under an archway that carries sound, perfectly toward the inner chambers. A stable boy loops around the far side of the yard, his steps echoing through the quieter corridor where the acoustics swallow noise instead of carrying it. You realize the architecture guides them, nudging their movements with the same silent authority that shaped your own steps moments ago. The drawbridge begins to lift, and you watch how the motion flows into the rest of the castle. The machinery groans with a steady rhythm, the chains clanking in a beat that feels almost like a pulse. The vibrations travel up the gatehouse walls and into the battlements, where guards respond with synchronized precision. They move toward the merlons, slipping into shadows designed to hide them while giving them a full view of the land beyond. The interplay of light and dark becomes another part of the organism, shielding its most vulnerable pieces. You follow the curve of the inner wall and see how the towers communicate through movement rather than sound. A guard on the eastern turret raises a lantern and lowers it again in a pattern that seems simple until you notice another tower answering with a different gesture. The towers behave like the nervous system, sending signals across the structure faster than shouts could travel. Even the wind-swept parapets help, carrying hints of sound from one side of the fortress to the other, allowing subtle vibrations to warn guards long before a cry reaches their ears. Inside the keep, the rooms shift into their alternate purpose with quiet grace. Spaces meant for feasting become staging areas. Warm alcoves, where servants once paused for breath, now serve as strategic corners where runners wait for orders. You watch one slip into a hidden passage, disappearing as though the castle swallowed him whole. The secret corridors you explored earlier come alive, acting as arteries for urgent movement. You sense the design clearly now. These spaces are not extras or curiosities. They are essential organs, vital pathways activating when pressure rises. The storerooms you visited are suddenly the calm heart of the entire structure. People move in and out of them with efficient purpose, taking only what they need. Their steps follow lines carved by habit and architecture, no one bumping or colliding despite the rising tension. The walls shape the flow the same way a riverbank shapes water. Even the colors in the corridors shift your understanding now. Warm tones guide residents toward safety. Cooler tones lead defenders to their posts. You step into the great hall and feel the tension concentrated there like a deep breath held just before action. The space absorbs the movement of people who gather briefly, exchange information, then disperse along predetermined routes. Every doorway becomes a mouth, every hallway a limb, every tower a watchful eye. The castle directs its inhabitants with a confidence born of centuries of purpose. Outside, shadows lengthen and the first torches flare, throwing flickering light against the walls. The battlements seem to inhale the darkness, using it to sharpen their defensive shape. The moat glints faintly, calm on the surface but ready to turn threatening if needed. Even the village beyond responds, people adjusting their positions, closing shutters, guiding animals inside, as if following a script written into the land. You realize this moment is not chaos. It is choreography. Every stone, every passage, every window and door plays its part. And as you stand there in the center of it all, the truth settles into you with quiet certainty. The castle is alive, not metaphorically, not fancifully. Alive in the way a system built from purpose and memory can be alive. And it is doing exactly what it was made to do. You walk beyond the last line of stones, past the well-worn path that skirts the moat, until the whole fortress settles into view like a great creature resting after a long watch. From this distance, the noise of the courtyard fades, the bustle of servants shrinks to scattered motion, and the towers lose their sharp edges in the settling light. You feel the quiet stretch out around you, soft and steady, as if the castle finally allows you to see it without the distractions of daily life inside its walls. You take in the layers you walked through earlier, each one revealing its own secret logic, and now they stack together in your mind with a satisfying clarity. The angled walls you touched, the spiraling stairs you climbed, the cramped servant passages you slipped through, all of them feel less like separate curiosities and more like linked thoughts in a single patient mind. The fortress stands not as a monument to power, but as a record of careful decisions, each stone shaped by someone who understood that survival was equal parts strength, cunning, and quiet anticipation. The wind shifts across the battlements, curling around the highest tower with a practiced familiarity, and you think of how the structure bends that same wind in a way that protects its people without them ever noticing. Nothing in this place was accidental. Even the smallest choices were made with an eye toward the long game, the same way a seasoned chess player studies the board and sees moves hidden from others. The moat, the traps, the heating corridors, the hierarchy of rooms, all tuned to influence human behavior as gently as they redirect the weather. You watch a pair of guards pacing along the upper walk, their silhouettes moving in rhythm with the shape of the battlements. The crenellations guide their steps, not with commands, but with geometry, nudging them toward steadiness. It hits you that the builders designed a structure where people do the right thing almost by instinct, because the walls lean, the towers rise, and the spaces open just so. The fortress behaves like a teacher that never raises its voice. The village below seems stitched to the castle's edges in the same subtle way. Houses cluster where protection is strongest, workshops align with the flow of trade, and roads curve with the terrain that once dictated defensive lines. The entire landscape feels imprinted with the castle's intention, as if the fortress taught the settlement how to grow, where to breathe, and when to brace. The influence stretches farther than the walls, farther than the moat, farther even than sight. It shapes habits, expectations, even identities. As you stand at this distance, you realize the builders did not work for applause or monuments. They worked for continuity. They created a design that would outlast them not through grandeur but through 1,000 invisible nudges that guided generations towards safety. The castle holds their thoughts the way trees hold rings, quiet but undeniable. You feel a strange mix of awe and humility wash over you, because the builders are gone, their names worn smooth by time, yet their intelligence moves through the structure as clearly as if they can see had just stepped away. And in this stillness, one truth settles deeper than all the others. The genius of the place was never its size or its stone. It was the understanding that architecture could shape behavior, influence choices, and protect lives long after its creators turned to dust. You take one final look at the fortress, letting its silhouette etch itself into your memory. Then you turn away, carrying its quiet wisdom with you, knowing it will endure long after you are gone too.